The fluorescent lights of Rodriguez Auto Repair cast harsh shadows across the oil-stained concrete floor as Marcus Williams methodically cleaned his tools. The familiar smell of motor oil and brake fluid filled his nostril sense that had become as comforting as his wife's perfume over the past 12 years of working as a mechanic. His calloused hands, permanently stained with grease despite countless washings, moved with practiced efficiency as he organized his wrench set and socket collection. The wall clock above the service bay ticked past midnight, its red digital numbers glowing like angry eyes in the dimly lit shop. Marcus had volunteered for the late shift again, knowing the overtime pay would help cover Emma's school supplies and maybe even that bicycle she'd been eyeing at the department store. At 34, he carried the weight of responsibility on his shoulders like a heavy toolbox. Every extra hour worked was another step toward giving his family the life they deserved. "Another long one, Marcus?" called out Tony Rodriguez, the shop owner, as he locked up his office. The older man's weathered face showed genuine concern for his most reliable employee. "You've been pulling doubles all week, hermano. Sarah's gonna start charging me rent for keeping you here so late." Marcus chuckled, wiping his hands on the red shop rag he always kept in his back pocket. "You know how it is, Tony. Emma wants to take those piano lessons, and Sarah's been eyeing that nursing program at the community college. Every little bit helps." He hefted his heavy toolbox, a Christmas gift from Sarah 3 years ago, when his old one finally fell apart, and headed toward the employee parking lot. The October night air bit at his exposed arms as he stepped outside. Detroit's autumn carried promises of the harsh winter ahead, and Marcus pulled his jacket tighter around his frame. The parking lot was nearly empty except for his weathered pickup truck, a 2008 Ford that had seen better days, but still ran like a dream thanks to his careful maintenance. He'd bought it used when Emma was born, and despite Sarah's gentle suggestions about getting something newer, Marcus couldn't bring himself to part with the vehicle that had brought his daughter home from the hospital. As he approached his truck, Marcus mentally ran through tomorrow's schedule. Emma had a school play rehearsal at 3. She was playing a sunflower in the class production, and her excitement had been infectious for weeks. Sarah would pick her up since Marcus had promised. To look at Mrs. Henderson's car, the elderly neighbor whose fixed income made professional repairs impossible. These small acts of kindness were simply part of who Marcus was, though he never thought of them as extraordinary. He was loading his toolbox into the truck bed when the first police car appeared. The Crown Victoria's headlights cut through the darkness like searchlights, followed immediately by a second patrol car that positioned itself to block the parking lot exit. Marcus's heart began hammering in his chest, not from guilt, but from the natural fear any black man in Detroit felt when surrounded by police in the middle of the night. He kept his hands visible and moved slowly, remembering the conversations he'd had with his father about staying alive during police encounters. "Step away from the vehicle." The command came from Officer Patricia Kowalski, a woman Marcus had never seen before. She emerged from the first patrol car with military precision, her hand resting on her service weapon. But it wasn't Kowalski who commanded attention. It was the massive German shepherd straining at the leash beside her. The dog was magnificent, all black and tan fur, with intelligent eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Marcus had always loved dogs. He and Sarah had talked about getting Emma a puppy for her next birthday, but something about this animal's intensity made his skin crawl. The shepherd pulled toward Marcus with single-minded determination, its powerful muscles rippling beneath its coat. "Sir, I need you to step away from your vehicle and place your hands where I can see them," Kowalski continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This is Rex, and he's indicating the presence of narcotics." Marcus raised his hands slowly, confusion and fear warring in his mind. "Officer, I think there's been some mistake." I'm just leaving work. I'm a mechanic at this shop. You can ask Tony Rodriguez, the owner. He's probably still inside. But Kowalski wasn't listening. Rex had gone into what she called his alert behavior, barking frantically and pawing at Marcus's toolbox with determined precision. The dog's performance was so convincing that even Marcus began to doubt his own innocence for a split second. How could such a well-trained animal be wrong? Rex here has never been wrong in 4 years of service, Kowalski announced, her tone suggesting that questioning the dog's abilities was tantamount to questioning gravity itself. He's led to over 200 successful arrests and has a 95% conviction rate. When Rex says there are drugs, there are drugs. Other officers emerged from the patrol cars, their faces set in expressions of professional boredom. This was routine for them, another drug bust, another criminal caught red-handed. Marcus tried to explain that he'd never used drugs in his life, that he barely drank alcohol except for an occasional beer while watching Detroit Lions games. But his protests seemed to bounce off the officers like rain on a windshield. The search was methodical and humiliating. They emptied his toolbox, piece by piece, examining each wrench and screwdriver as if they were examining evidence in a murder case. Marcus watched in growing horror as his carefully organized tools, some inherited from his father, others saved, for months to purchase, were scattered across the asphalt like debris from a car crash. Well, well, well. Kowalski's voice carried a note of satisfaction that made Marcus's blood run cold. Look what we have here. She held up a small plastic baggie containing what looked like white powder, her flashlight beam making it glow like evidence from a crime show. The baggie had been wedged deep inside his wrench compartment, in a space so narrow that Marcus would have needed needle-nose pliers to place it there, if he had ever wanted to hide drugs in his toolbox, which he absolutely had not. That's not mine, Marcus said, his voice cracking with desperation. I've never seen that before in my life. Someone must have planted it. I don't even know how it got in there. But the handcuffs were already clicking around his wrists, cold, metal biting into his skin like the jaws of some mechanical predator. The Miranda rights flowed over him in a meaningless stream of legal jargon, while his mind raced with panicked thoughts of Sarah and Emma. How would he explain this? How could he make anyone believe that he was innocent when a police dog and physical evidence said otherwise? As the patrol car door slammed shut behind him, Marcus caught one last glimpse of Rex sitting calmly beside Officer Kowalski, looking for all the world like the hero of the hour. The dog's tail wagged slightly, as if satisfied with a job well done. Marcus Williams had no way of knowing that this moment, this terrible, life-destroying moment, was built on lies that would eventually crumble thanks to 2 innocent words from his 8-year-old daughter. All he knew was that his world had just ended, and somewhere across the city, Sarah was probably wondering why he was late coming home. Sarah Williams stared at the bail bondsman's computer screen, the numbers blurring through her tears. $50,000. The amount might as well have been $50 million for a family that counted every penny twice. Her hands trembled as she clutched the crumpled tissue that had become her constant companion over the past 18 hours. 18 hours since the phone call that shattered her world into a million pieces. Mrs. Williams, I understand this is difficult, said Carl Martinez, the bail bondsman, his voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered bad news for a living. But even with our 10% fee, you'd still need $5,000 cash, plus collateral for the full amount. Do you own your home? Sarah's laugh was bitter and hollow. We rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Riverside. Our car is 12 years old and barely worth $2,000. My husband's been saving for months just to buy our daughter a bicycle for Christmas. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing the makeup she'd hastily applied before rushing to the bondsman's office. I'm a hospital aide. I make $11 an hour. Where am I supposed to get $5,000? The small office felt suffocating, its wood-paneled walls covered with faded certificates and photographs of Martinez with various local politicians. The fluorescent light above buzzed incessantly, adding to Sarah's growing headache. She'd been up all night, pacing their tiny living room, calling everyone she could think of who might be able to help. Her sister in California was struggling with her own mortgage. Her mother lived on Social Security. Marcus's brother had been laid off from the Ford plant 6 months ago. There might be other options, Martinez said carefully, sliding a business card across his desk. This attorney specializes in drug cases. David Chun. He sometimes works with families in challenging financial situations. Sarah took the card with shaking fingers. David Chun, criminal defense attorney. The card was simple, professional, but to Sarah, it represented the last thread of hope she had left. Does he win cases like this? Martinez hesitated, and that hesitation told Sarah everything she needed to know. Mrs. Williams, when a police dog finds drugs, the conviction rate is over 90%. But Chun is good. If anyone can help your husband, it's him. The drive home took Sarah through neighborhoods that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Every police car she passed made her heart race. Every news van parked on a street corner made her wonder if they were talking about Marcus, painting him as another drug dealer in a city already drowning in addiction and violence. She pulled into the parking lot of Rainbow Learning Center, where Emma was in extended care, and sat in her car for 5 minutes, trying to compose herself. Emma mounted out of the building with her usual 8-year-old exuberance, her pigtails bouncing and her backpack covered in stickers of cartoon animals. "Mommy, where's Daddy? He promised to help me with my math homework tonight." Sarah's heart broke into smaller pieces. How do you explain to a child that her father, her hero, the man who read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bike, was sitting in a jail cell? How do you find words for something so incomprehensible that even adults struggle to process it? "Daddy had to go away for a little while, sweetheart," Sarah said, buckling Emma into her booster seat. "But he loves you very much, and he's going to come home as soon as he can." "Is he at Grandma's house?" Emma asked, swinging her legs and humming a tune she'd learned at school. "Can we call him? I want to tell him about the doggie we saw at school today. Mrs. Peterson brought her German Shepherd for show and tell. His name was Buddy, and he was so smart. He could sit and stay and everything." The mention of a German Shepherd sent chills down Sarah's spine. She'd met Rex once before, or at least she thought she had. It was at the Johnsons' barbecue last summer, wasn't it? That friendly dog that had played fetch with Emma and eaten hamburger scraps when no one was looking. But that couldn't have been the same dog, could it? Police dogs weren't pets that attended neighborhood barbecues. That evening, after putting Emma to bed with promises that Daddy would call soon, Sarah sat at their kitchen table with a calculator, a pile of bills, and David Chun's business card. She'd already called in sick to work something she'd never done in 3 years of employment, but she couldn't face the sympathetic looks and whispered conversations that would inevitably follow the morning news. The local television station had picked up the story. Mechanic arrested in drug bust. They'd used Marcus's old DMV photo, the one where he looked tired and serious, instead of the warm, smiling man who danced with Emma in the living room and brought Sarah flowers from the grocery store, just because. The reporter made it sound like an open and shut case. Police dog Rex, with a 95% success rate, alerted officers to narcotics hidden in the suspect's toolbox. Sarah's phone rang at 10:30. It was Marcus, calling from county jail, his voice strained and hollow through the static-filled connection. "Baby, I didn't do this," were his first words, and Sarah's heart shattered all over again, because she could hear the desperation in his voice, the voice of a man who knew that his word meant nothing against physical evidence and police testimony. "I know, Marcus. I know you didn't." Sarah pressed the phone to her ear, as if she could somehow reach through it and hold him. "I found a lawyer, David Chun. People say he's good." "How much?" Marcus asked, because even in jail, even facing 20 years in prison, his first concern was the financial burden on his family. "We'll figure it out," Sarah lied, looking at the stack of overdue notices and the pathetic balance in their checking account. "Emma keeps asking about you. She doesn't understand why you can't come home." Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought the call had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with tears. "Sarah, what if they don't believe me? What if that dog and that baggie are enough to convict me? What happens to you and Emma?" "Don't talk like that," Sarah said fiercely, though her own doubts gnawed at her like hungry wolves. "We're going to fight this. That lawyer is going to prove you're innocent, and you're going to come home. And Emma is going to show you her sunflower costume for the school play." But after she hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness of their small apartment, listening to Emma's peaceful breathing through the thin walls, and wondered how many families had sat in similar darkness, making similar promises they weren't sure they could keep. She thought about that German Shepherd again, about Rex and his perfect record of convictions. Something nagged at her memory, something just out of reach. At midnight, she made a decision that would cost her everything they had left, but might save everything that mattered. She picked up David Chun's business card and began to dial, praying that somewhere in the labyrinth of the legal system, there was still room for truth to survive. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Hayes stood before the mirror in her corner office, adjusting her navy blue blazer and rehearsing her opening statement one final time. At 38, she had built her career on high-profile drug convictions, and Marcus Williams represented another stepping stone toward the district attorney's office she coveted. The morning sun streamed through her windows, illuminating the wall of commendations and newspaper clippings that chronicled her meteoric rise through Wayne County's prosecutor ranks. "Dogs don't lie, ladies and gentlemen," she practiced her voice, carrying the authoritative tone that had intimidated defense attorneys for years. "Unlike humans, they cannot be bribed, threatened, or corrupted. When Rex alerts, justice follows." She smiled at her reflection, satisfied with the line that would become her signature phrase during the trial. Her assistant, Michael Torres, knocked and entered with a steaming cup of coffee and the morning briefing. "The Williams case file is ready for review, Jennifer. Rex's service record is impeccable. 237 successful arrests, 95% conviction rate, 0 false positives on record. Officer Kowalski's testimony is rock solid." Hayes flipped through Rex's impressive portfolio like a proud parent reviewing a child's report card. Photographs showed the magnificent German Shepherd in action, alerting on hidden contraband, sitting obediently beside piles of seized drugs, receiving commendation ribbons from the mayor's office. Rex had been featured in the Detroit Police Department's recruitment videos. His noble profile used to illustrate the cutting-edge technology that kept citizens safe from the drug epidemic plaguing their city. "What about the defense?" Hayes asked, though she already knew the answer. David Chun was competent but underfunded, representing clients who couldn't afford the legal powerhouses that money could buy. "Are they planning any surprises?" Torres shrugged. Chun filed the usual motions, questioning the reliability of canine evidence, but precedent is overwhelmingly in our favor. Michigan courts have upheld dog alerts as probable cause in over 300 cases in the past 5 years. The Supreme Court ruling in Florida v. Harris practically made drug dogs infallible in the eyes of the law. Hayes felt the familiar thrill of an unwinnable case, the kind that made headlines and impressed voters when election time came around. The evidence was perfect. Rex's alert, the cocaine discovered in Williams' toolbox. No witnesses to contradict the police narrative. Even if Chun managed to raise doubts about Williams' character, the physical evidence would carry the day. "Tell me about the defendant," Hayes said, settling behind her mahogany desk with the case files. "Any criminal history? Gang affiliations? Drug treatment programs?" "That's the interesting part," Torres replied, consulting his notes. "Marcus. Williams is cleaner than most Sunday school teachers. No arrests, no convictions, not even a speeding ticket in the past 10 years. Married, 1 child, steady employment. His neighbors describe him as helpful and quiet. The shop owner, Tony Rodriguez, says Williams is the most reliable employee he's ever had." Hayes frowned. Perfect defendants made for complicated narratives, but they weren't insurmountable. First-time offenders often present as model citizens. That's what makes them effective drug dealers. They fly under the radar. Williams probably thought his clean record would protect him from suspicion. The prosecutor's conference room buzzed with activity as Hayes's team assembled for the final strategy session. Detective Ray Morrison, who had investigated dozens of Rex's cases, spread crime scene photographs across the polished table. The images told a compelling story. Williams standing beside his truck with his hands raised, Rex alerting with professional precision, the incriminating baggie nestled deep within the suspect's toolbox. "The positioning of the cocaine is actually perfect for our case," Morrison explained, pointing to close-up photographs. "Williams wedged it so deep into his wrench compartment that only someone with intimate knowledge of that toolbox could have placed it there. This wasn't casual possession. This was someone who knew exactly where to hide contraband." Hayes nodded approvingly. Every detail supported their narrative of calculated criminality. "What about his financial situation? Any large cash deposits? Unexplained purchases?" "Nothing unusual," Morrison admitted. "Williams lives paycheck to paycheck. His wife works part-time at the hospital. They drive an old truck and rent a modest apartment. If he's dealing drugs, he's not making much money at it. Small-time dealers often struggle financially," Hayes countered smoothly. "Williams was probably just starting his criminal enterprise. We caught him before he could build a significant operation." Officer Patricia Kowalski arrived 30 minutes early for their meeting, Rex trotting beside her with the confidence of a seasoned professional. The German Shepherd's presence always impressed prosecutors and juries alike. His muscular build and alert demeanor embodied everything Americans expected from law enforcement. Hayes had worked with Kowalski on dozens of cases, and the officer's testimony was always flawless. "How's our star witness?" Hayes asked, scratching behind Rex's ears. The dog accepted her attention with dignified reserve, his dark eyes scanning the room with intelligence that seemed almost human. "Rex is ready," Kowalski replied, her voice carrying the pride of a trainer discussing a prize-winning athlete. His performance that night was textbook perfect. The alert was immediate and decisive, no hesitation, no uncertainty. When Rex smells drugs, his behavior is unmistakable. Hayes reviewed Kowalski's service record with satisfaction. 4 years with the K-9 unit, commendations from supervisors, glowing performance evaluations. The officer's background was as clean as her dog's success rate. Even Chun's most aggressive cross-examination wouldn't dent Kowalski's credibility. "The defense will probably argue that Williams was set up," Hayes mused, "but they'll need evidence to support that theory. Accusations without proof just make defendants look desperate." The team spent the afternoon rehearsing their courtroom presentation. Rex performed flawlessly during practice runs, alerting on planted contraband while ignoring decoy items. His demonstrations never failed to impress observers. The dog's focused intensity and precise behavior conveyed an almost scientific reliability that human testimony couldn't match. Hayes's phone buzzed with a text from her campaign manager. Channel 7 wants an interview after the conviction. Perfect timing with the election 18 months away. She smiled, already imagining the headline. Tough prosecutor takes another drug dealer off Detroit streets. As evening approached, Hayes stood at her office window, overlooking downtown Detroit, watching traffic crawl through streets that had seen too much violence and addiction. Marcus Williams represented everything wrong with the city, the drug trade that poisoned neighborhoods and destroyed families. His conviction would send a message that law enforcement had the tools and determination to fight back. Her reflection stared back from the darkening glass, and Hayes practiced her closing argument one final time. Marcus Williams bet his freedom on the belief that his clean appearance would fool the police. But he couldn't fool Rex. Justice has 4 legs and a cold nose, and today justice prevailed. Tomorrow, she would stand before 12 jurors and present what she believed was the perfect case, unshakable evidence, credible witnesses, and a defendant caught red-handed by the most reliable crime-fighting tool in modern law enforcement. Hayes had no way of knowing that perfection built on lies was destined to crumble, or that the truth would come from the most innocent source imaginable. She packed her briefcase with confidence, ready to add another conviction to her impressive record, never suspecting that 2 words from a little girl would soon expose the rotten foundation beneath her perfect case. Defense attorney David Chun's office occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in downtown Detroit, a far cry from the gleaming law firms that lined the city's financial district. The building's brick walls wore decades of industrial grime, and the ancient radiator clanked through the night like a mechanical ghost. Chun preferred it this way. The modest rent allowed him to take cases others wouldn't touch, representing clients who couldn't afford justice at market prices. At 2 a.m, Chun sat hunched over his computer, surrounded by towers of legal documents, empty coffee cups, and the detritus of a desperate search for truth. His wife had called twice asking when he was coming home, but Chun couldn't leave. Something about the Marcus Williams case gnawed at him, like a persistent toothache, details that didn't quite align, inconsistencies so subtle they might have been coincidences, but his 30 years of criminal defense had taught him that coincidences were often camouflaged lies. Rex's service record lay spread across his desk like evidence of canine sainthood. 237 successful arrests, 95% conviction rate, commendations from 3 different mayors. The dog's photograph smiled up. From police department newsletters, his noble German Shepherd profile used to illustrate everything right about modern law enforcement. Yet something bothered Chun about the timeline. October 15th, Chun muttered to himself, cross-referencing incident reports with veterinary records he'd subpoenaed. Rex supposedly alerts on Marcus Williams' toolbox at 12:30 a.m. He flipped to another document. But here's a veterinary treatment record showing Rex was treated for lacerations and a possible concussion at Detroit Animal Emergency Hospital from 9 p.m. on October 14th through 6 a.m. on October 15th. The discrepancy hit him like lightning. How could Rex have been working the streets while simultaneously recovering from injuries at an animal hospital 15 miles away? Chun reached for his phone, dialing the emergency vet clinic despite the ungodly hour. Dr. Martinez? This is David Chun, attorney for Marcus Williams. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to verify some records. Yes, I can hold. Chun paced his cluttered office, stepping over law books and case files while waiting. Dr. Martinez, you treated a police dog named Rex on October 14th and 15th? He was there all night. Are you absolutely certain he couldn't have left the facility? No, doctor. This is about a case where Rex supposedly found drugs that same night. The veterinarian's confusion came through clearly. Mr. Chun, that's impossible. Rex was sedated from 10 p.m. until morning. He had deep lacerations from broken glass and showed signs of head trauma. We monitored him continuously. He couldn't have been working. Chun felt his pulse quicken. One thread pulled, and the entire tapestry began to unravel. "Doctor, would you be willing to testify to that under oath?" After hanging up, Chun dove deeper into the K9 unit's records. Requests he'd filed weeks earlier, finally bearing fruit. What he found made his blood run cold. Officer Patricia Kowalski's unit faced severe budget cuts. Rumors suggested the entire K-9 program might be eliminated if arrest statistics didn't improve. 3 other officers had been reassigned after their dogs failed to maintain quotas. Kowalski was fighting to save not just her job, but Rex's life. The prosecutor's office had painted Kowalski as a dedicated professional, but Chun discovered a different story buried in personnel files. Disciplinary actions for aggressive behavior. Complaints from citizens about excessive force. A messy divorce that left her struggling financially. Most damning of all, Rex hadn't been her original partner. The dog had been reassigned to her just 6 months earlier after her previous German Shepherd was retired due to age. Chun's paralegal, Maria Santos, arrived at 6 a.m. to find her boss still at his desk, surrounded by evidence that suggested something far more sinister than a simple drug bust. "David, you look terrible," Maria said, setting down fresh coffee. "And bagels. Please tell me you found something that can help Marcus Williams." "I found something," Chun replied, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "But I'm not sure anyone will believe it." He walked her through his discoveries. Rex's veterinary treatment, Kowalski's financial pressures, the budget cuts threatening the K9 unit. "Maria, what if Rex wasn't the dog who alerted that night?" Maria stared at the evidence spread across multiple tables. "You're suggesting officer substitution? Using a different dog and claiming it was Rex?" "It explains everything," Chun said, his excitement growing despite his fatigue. Rex was injured and hospitalized. Kowalski needed an arrest to save her job. She uses another German Shepherd, maybe her personal pet, and fabricates the alert. Plants the drugs herself, using evidence from previous cases. The implications were staggering. If Chun was right, dozens of convictions could be overturned. Kowalski would face federal charges. The entire Detroit Police K9 program would be scrutinized. But proving it would require more than circumstantial evidence and suspicious timing. "We need to examine the arrest video," Chun decided. "Every patrol car has dashboard cameras. If we can analyze the dog's behavior, physical characteristics, maybe we can prove it wasn't Rex." Hours later, Chun sat in a darkened conference room with video expert Patricia Wong, frame by frame analyzing footage from Kowalski's patrol car. The quality was poor, grainy black and white images that made detailed analysis difficult, but Wong had software that could enhance and clarify. "Look at this," Wong said, freezing the video as the German Shepherd approached Marcus's truck. "See how this dog holds his head?" Rex's official photos show him with a distinctive ear, set left ear slightly more forward than the right due to an old injury, but this dog's ears are perfectly symmetrical. Chun leaned closer to the monitor. "Can you be certain it's not the same dog?" "Without better footage or physical measurements, I can't be 100% certain," Wong admitted. "But there are other differences. This dog's gait is different. His tail carriage is different. Most telling is the alert behavior itself." Wong pulled up training videos of Rex performing drug detection demonstrations. "Watch Rex's standard alert. He sits immediately upon detecting contraband, then looks directly at his handler. It's textbook behavior, perfectly trained." She switched back to the arrest footage. "Now watch this dog. The alert is delayed, uncertain. He looks around nervously, almost like he's waiting for commands rather than responding to scent." The differences were subtle, but significant to trained eyes. Rex moved with the confidence of a seasoned professional. The dog in the arrest video seemed hesitant, almost confused by what was expected of him. Chun's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Williams. "Any good news? Marcus is losing hope." The message broke his heart. Marcus sat in county jail, while Chun chased shadows and half-formed theories. Even if he was right about the dog substitution, proving it in court would be nearly impossible without concrete physical evidence. But as dawn broke over Detroit, Chun made a decision that would define not just this case, but his entire career. He would bet everything on the belief that truth, however hidden, eventually fought its way to the surface. Marcus Williams deserved nothing less than his attorney's complete faith and desperate determination. "Maria," he called to his paralegal, "get me everything you can find about Officer Kowalski's personal life. Her address, her neighbors, her veterinarian records. If she owns a German Shepherd that looks like Rex, I want to know about it." The foundation of the prosecution's perfect case was showing cracks, and David Schoen intended to hammer them until the entire structure collapsed. The Wayne County Circuit Court buzzed with an electricity that could power the entire courthouse. Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom had seen thousands of cases over the years, but few had generated the media attention surrounding People of Michigan versus Marcus Williams. Camera crews lined the hallway outside, their bright lights and microphones creating a gauntlet that every participant had to navigate. The story had captured Detroit's imagination. A hard-working mechanic versus the infallible police dog that never made mistakes. Sarah Williams sat in the front row of the gallery, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. She wore her best-dressed navy blue with small flowers, purchased 3 years ago for Emma's school program and saved for special occasions that never seemed special enough. Today felt like the most important day of her life, yet she looked around the imposing courtroom and felt smaller than she ever had before. Emma sat beside her grandmother, swinging her legs and coloring in a Disney princess book, blissfully unaware that her father's future hung in the balance just 30 feet away. The 8-year-old had asked that morning why Daddy couldn't come to breakfast again, and Sarah's heart had broken a little more with each innocent question. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison," the bailiff announced, his voice echoing off the mahogany-paneled walls. The courtroom erupted in the rustle of clothing and shuffling of feet as nearly 200 spectators stood in unison. Judge Morrison entered with the measured stride of someone who had presided over justice for 23 years, her black robes flowing behind her like wings of authority. Marcus Williams stood at the defense table beside David Chun, wearing the only suit he owned purchased for his wedding 12 years earlier, and now slightly tight around the shoulders from years of physical labor. His hands shook almost imperceptibly as he looked back at Sarah, trying to convey strength he didn't feel. The orange jumpsuit he'd worn for 6 weeks had been replaced by civilian clothes, but he still felt like a prisoner, still felt the weight of the county jail on his shoulders. "Your Honor," Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Hayes began her opening statement, rising with the confidence of a gladiator entering the arena. Her voice carried clearly through the packed courtroom, each word carefully chosen to paint Marcus Williams as a calculating criminal who had finally been caught. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about trust. Trust in our justice system, trust in our law enforcement officers, and most importantly, trust in the unshakable reliability of scientific evidence." Hayes gestured dramatically toward Officer Patricia Kowalski and the magnificent German Shepherd sitting beside her. Rex appeared every inch the professional law enforcement officer, alert, disciplined, and somehow noble in a way that transcended species. His dark eyes surveyed the courtroom with intelligent awareness, and several jurors nodded approvingly at his impressive bearing. "Rex is not just a dog," Hayes continued, her voice rising with passion. He is a highly trained crime-fighting instrument, more accurate than most laboratory equipment, more reliable than human testimony, and absolutely incorruptible. In 4 years of service, Rex has never not once given a false alert. His success rate of 95% in obtaining convictions speaks not to prosecutorial skill, but to canine excellence. A prosecutor walked slowly in front of the jury box, making eye contact with each of the 12 men and women who would decide Marcus's fate. On the night of October 15th, Rex did what he has done hundreds of times before. He detected the presence of illegal narcotics and alerted his handler to their location. The defendant, Marcus Williams, was caught red-handed with cocaine, hidden in his toolbox cocaine that was destined for Detroit's streets. Cocaine that would have poisoned our children and destroyed our neighborhoods. Marcus felt each word, like a physical blow. The prosecution's narrative was simple, compelling, and devastatingly effective. He watched the jurors' faces, seeing skepticism harden into certainty, as Hayes painted him as just another drug dealer hiding behind a facade of respectability. David Chun's opening statement faced the impossible task of creating doubt, where none seemed to exist. He stood slowly, his rumpled suit and tired eyes contrasting sharply with Hayes's polished presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, my client Marcus Williams is innocent. Not probably innocent, not technically innocent completely, absolutely innocent of these charges. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably, their expressions suggesting they'd heard such claims from countless defense attorneys over the years. Chun pressed on, knowing he was fighting an uphill battle against evidence that seemed unshakable. The prosecution wants you to believe that dogs are infallible, that training guarantees perfection, that Rex could never make a mistake. But I ask you to remember that behind every dog is a human handler, and humans, unlike dogs, can lie, can make mistakes, can even commit crimes themselves. Hayes objected immediately. Your Honor, counsel is making arguments not supported by evidence. Sustained, Judge Morrison ruled. Mr. Chun, please confine your opening to what you intend to prove, not speculation. Chun nodded respectfully, but continued his careful assault on the prosecution's seemingly perfect case. He couldn't reveal his suspicions about dog substitution without proof, couldn't mention the veterinary records that might exonerate Marcus without first establishing their admissibility. Instead, he had to plant seeds of doubt that might bloom during cross-examination. The first witness was Detective Ray Morrison, who had arrived at the scene shortly after Marcus's arrest. His testimony was methodical and damaging, describing Rex's professional behavior in the careful chain of custody for the cocaine evidence. Morrison had worked with Rex on dozens of cases and spoke of the dog with a reverence usually reserved for decorated war heroes. Detective Morrison, Chun, began his cross-examination. You've testified that Rex is highly trained and reliable. Have you ever known a police dog to make a mistake? Objection, Hayes interrupted. Calls for speculation about other cases not before this court. Overruled, Judge Morrison said. The witness may answer. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Well, dogs are animals, counselor. They can have off days like anyone else, but Rex has never failed me personally. Has Rex ever been injured on duty? Yes, he's been hurt a few times. Comes with the territory. Were you aware that Rex was treated at Detroit Animal Emergency Hospital on the night of October 14th through the morning of October 15th? Hayes shot to her feet. Objection. Where is Mr. Chun going with this line of questioning? Judge Morrison looked puzzled. Mr. Chun, please establish relevance. Your Honor, the dog's physical condition is directly relevant to his ability to perform his duties on the night in question. I'll allow it, but make your point quickly. Morrison looked confused and slightly worried. I wasn't aware of any veterinary treatment that night. No. Chun felt the first crack in the prosecution's Armor. The detective's uncertainty was visible to the jury, and uncertainty was doubt's closest cousin. Officer Kowalski took the stand next, and her testimony was flawless. She described Rex's training, his service record, and the events of October 15th with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every detail. Rex sat beside the witness stand, occasionally looking up at his handler with what appeared to be professional devotion. Officer Kowalski, Chun began his cross-examination. You've worked with Rex for how long? 6 months, sir. He was reassigned to me after my previous partner was retired. And in those 6 months, has Rex ever failed to detect drugs that were actually present? No, sir. Rex is exceptionally reliable. Chun paused, studying Kowalski's face for any sign of nervousness. Officer, where do you keep Rex when he's not on duty? Hayes objected to the relevance, but Judge Morrison allowed the question. Rex stays at the police kennel facility, Kowalski answered smoothly. Not at your home? No, sir. Department policy prohibits officers from taking canine partners home. Sean nodded, filing away the lie for future use. His investigation had revealed that Kowalski lived alone in a house with a large backyard perfect for a German shepherd that neighbors had reported seeing regularly. As the day's testimony concluded, Sarah Williams watched her husband being led back to the holding cell, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The prosecution's case seemed overwhelming, their witnesses credible and confident. Only David Chun's quiet determination suggested that this seemingly hopeless battle might still have surprises ahead. In the hallway outside the courtroom, reporters thrust microphones toward anyone connected to the case, hungry for soundbites that would lead the evening news. Sarah pushed through the crowd, shielding Emma from the chaos, wondering if justice was just another word for whoever told the most convincing story. The lunch recess arrived like a welcome intermission in a play that had grown too intense for its audience. Judge Morrison's gavel echoed through the packed courtroom as she announced a 90-minute break, and the tension that had built over 3 hours of testimony began to dissipate like steam from a pressure cooker. Spectators filed out in clusters, discussing the morning's proceedings in hushed tones that carried equal parts fascination and judgment. Sarah Williams felt overwhelmed by the morning's events. The prosecution had presented their case with surgical precision, each piece of evidence building upon the last until Marcus's guilt seemed not just probable, but inevitable. She needed air, needed space, needed a moment away from the suffocating weight of legal proceedings that would determine whether her husband came home or disappeared into the prison system for decades. Grandma, I need to use the bathroom, Emma announced with the matter-of-fact directness that only 8-year-olds possessed. Her coloring book lay forgotten on the wooden bench, crayon marks decorating the margins where Disney princesses lived in their perfect, problem-free world. I'll take her, Sarah's mother Dorothy offered, rising with the careful movements of someone whose arthritis reminded her daily that 73 years had taken their toll. You stay here and try to eat something, honey. You haven't had a proper meal in weeks. Sarah nodded absently, watching her daughter skip down the courthouse hallway with the resilience that children somehow maintained, even when their worlds crumbled around them. Emma had adapted to her father's absence with the flexibility of youth, but Sarah noticed the changes, the way Emma talked to her stuffed animals more than usual, the nightmares that sent her crawling into Sarah's bed at 2 a.m, the constant questions about when Daddy was coming home. The courthouse cafeteria buzzed with lawyers, journalists, and courthouse personnel, grabbing quick lunches between hearings. Sarah bought a turkey sandwich she had no intention of eating and found an empty table near the window, where she could watch normal people living normal lives on the street below. A businessman hurried past, checking his phone. A mother pushed a stroller while talking animatedly to a friend. Simple moments that Sarah had taken for granted just weeks ago. Before police dogs and cocaine allegations, had transformed her family into a case number in the criminal justice system. Meanwhile, Emma had finished in the restroom and convinced her grandmother to let her explore the courthouse. "Just for a few minutes, Grandma. I want to see where Daddy sits." Dorothy, exhausted from the morning's emotional toll, agreed to a brief detour before rejoining Sarah. The courtroom appeared different when empty, larger somehow, less intimidating without the crowd of observers and the weight of active proceedings. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors where constitutional drama played out daily. Emma wandered toward the front of the room, her small hands trailing along the wooden barrier that separated spectators from participants. "This is where Daddy sits," she whispered to herself, approaching the defense table where Marcus had spent the morning trying to appear confident despite the terror gnawing at his insides. Emma climbed into his chair, her feet dangling several inches from the floor, and pretended to be a grown-up in a place designed for adult problems she couldn't fully comprehend. That's when she noticed the German Shepherd lying beside the prosecution table. Rex, or the dog everyone believed, Rex had been left in the courtroom during the recess, his leash secured to Officer Kowalski's chair. The animal rested on a thick blanket, no longer maintaining the rigid professional posture he'd displayed during testimony. Without the courtroom's formal atmosphere and the pressure of performance, he looked less like a law enforcement instrument and more like what he actually was, a pet seeking comfort and attention. Emma had always loved dogs. She'd been begging her parents for a puppy since she was old enough to form complete sentences, and Marcus had promised that when they moved to a house with a yard, they'd visit the animal shelter. The sight of the beautiful German Shepherd drew her like a magnet, overriding the caution her parents had tried to instill about approaching strange animals. As she moved closer, something clicked in Emma's memory, a recognition that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to the emotional center where childhood experiences lived. This wasn't just any German Shepherd. This was the friendly dog from Mr. Johnson's barbecue last summer, the one who'd played fetch with her and eaten hamburger scraps when the adults weren't looking, the one who'd let her pet his soft ears while he sprawled in the shade beside the picnic table. "Cooper?" she said tentatively, the name emerging from some buried corner of her 8-year-old memory bank. The effect was immediate and devastating to Officer Kowalski's carefully constructed deception. The dog's professional mask disappeared in an instant, replaced by the unbridled joy of a pet recognizing a beloved friend. His tail began wagging with such enthusiasm that his entire body wiggled. He jumped to his feet, straining against his leash and whimpering with excitement, trying desperately to reach the little girl who remembered his real name. "Hi, Cooper," Emma said more loudly, her face lighting up with genuine happiness at seeing a familiar friend in this scary place. "What are you doing here? Are you helping the police?" "You're so smart." Cooper's response was pure, unfiltered canine emotion. He pulled against his restraint, barking with excitement and trying to lick Emma's face as she knelt to pet him. His tail wagged so hard, knocked papers off the prosecution table. This wasn't the controlled, professional behavior of a trained police dog. This was a pet greeting a friend, abandoning all pretense of law enforcement dignity in favor of pure, honest affection. Dorothy Williams entered the courtroom, just in time to witness her granddaughter's reunion with the dog, who was supposed to be named Rex, and her 73 years of life experience told her immediately that something was terribly wrong with the picture before her. Police dogs didn't behave like house pets. They didn't abandon their training to play with children. They certainly didn't answer to names other than their official designations. "Emma, sweetheart, come away from the dog," Dorothy said carefully, her voice carrying a tension that made Emma look up questioningly. "But Grandma, this is Cooper. Remember Cooper from Mr. Johnson's barbecue? He's the nicest dog ever. He used to steal food when nobody was looking." Emma giggled at the memory, completely unaware that her innocent words were dismantling a criminal case built on lies. At that moment, Officer Patricia Kowalski rushed back into the courtroom, having forgotten her reading glasses on the prosecution table. She froze in the doorway, her face draining of all color as she witnessed the scene that would destroy her career and expose her crimes. Cooper continued his enthusiastic greeting, completely oblivious to the magnitude of his betrayal, of Kowalski's deception. "Get away from that dog," Kowalski snapped, her voice sharp with panic and desperation. Emma looked startled by the officer's harsh tone, but Dorothy Williams had seen enough. She scooped up her granddaughter protectively, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd witnessed. As a retired school administrator, Dorothy had developed an acute sense for when children were telling the truth, and Emma's recognition of Cooper had the unmistakable ring of honest memory. "Come on, sweetheart," Dorothy said gently, guiding Emma toward the exit. "Let's go find your mother." But as they left the courtroom, Emma called back over her shoulder with the casual friendliness that only children possessed. "Bye, Cooper. I hope I see you again soon." Officer Kowalski stood alone in the empty courtroom, staring at the dog whose joyful response to a child's greeting had just signed her arrest warrant. In that moment, she realized that her carefully constructed house of lies was collapsing, and there was nothing she could do to stop the avalanche of truth that an 8-year-old girl had just triggered with 2 innocent words. "Hi, Cooper." The most damaging testimony in the case of People versus Marcus Williams had just come from the prosecution's own star witness, delivered not through barking or alerting, but through the honest emotional response of a pet greeting a friend. Justice, it seemed, sometimes wore pigtails and spoke with the clear voice of childhood innocence. Dorothy Williams burst through the courthouse cafeteria doors like a woman possessed, her face flushed with excitement, and her silver hair slightly disheveled from her hurried journey through the marble corridors. Sarah looked up from her untouched turkey sandwich, immediately alarmed by her mother's expression, a mixture of shock, revelation, and something that might have been hope. "Sarah, you need to hear this," Dorothy said breathlessly, pulling Emma close while scanning the crowded cafeteria for prying ears. "Tell your mother what you just said to the dog, sweetheart." Emma looked confused by the sudden attention, but dutifully repeated her courthouse encounter. "I saw Cooper in the big room. He remembered me from Mr. Johnson's barbecue. He was so happy to see me, but the police lady got mad when I said hi to him." Sarah's sandwich fell from her nerveless fingers. The name Cooper hit her like a physical blow, dredging up memories she'd been trying to access for weeks. The neighborhood barbecue, the friendly German shepherd who'd played with Emma, the same dog that had somehow seemed familiar when she'd watched the courtroom proceedings. Her mind raced through the implications of her daughter's innocent revelation. "Mom, are you sure she said Cooper?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the cafeteria's bustling lunch crowd. "Clear as a bell," Dorothy confirmed. "And that dog responded like he'd found his long-lost best friend." "Sarah, police dogs don't act that way. They don't break character to play with children they've met at parties." 20 minutes later, defense attorney David Chun sat in stunned silence as Dorothy Williams recounted the lunchtime revelation in his temporary courthouse office. Emma sat on Chun's leather chair, spinning slowly while coloring a new picture this. One featuring a happy dog with Cooper, written in purple crayon beneath it. "Mrs. Williams," Chun said carefully, his legal mind racing through the ramifications, "you're absolutely certain Emma called the dog Cooper, and the animal responded to that name?" "Mr. Chun, I've been around children for 45 years, Dorothy replied with the authority of a retired educator. "I know the difference between a child making up stories and a child remembering something real." Emma recognized that dog, and that dog sure as hell recognized her. Chun felt the pieces of his impossible puzzle clicking into place. Rex hospitalized during the arrest. Officer Kowalski's financial pressures. The subtle differences in the arrest video. And now this, a child's innocent recognition of a dog that was supposed to be someone else entirely. The prosecution's perfect case was built on the foundation of a massive lie. "I need to request an emergency hearing," Chun said, already reaching for his phone. "Judge Morrison needs to hear this before the afternoon session begins." The emergency sidebar conference in Judge Morrison's chambers had the tension of a powder keg awaiting a spark. Ada Jennifer Hayes sat rigidly in her chair, her confident demeanor cracking as Chun outlined Emma's revelation and his supporting evidence. Officer Kowalski stood beside the prosecution table, her face pale and her hands trembling almost imperceptibly. "Your Honor," Chun began, spreading veterinary records, video analysis, and witness statements across the judge's massive desk. "I have evidence that the dog presented as Rex in this courtroom is actually a different animal entirely. Officer Kowalski's personal pet, named Cooper." Hayes shot to her feet, her voice sharp with desperation. "Your Honor, this is completely speculative. Defense counsel is grasping at straws, trying to distract from overwhelming physical evidence." "Ms. Hayes," Judge Morrison said dryly, "overwhelming evidence built on fraud is no evidence at all. Mr. Chun, you have 30 minutes to present your case. Officer Kowalski, you will remain in this chamber." Chun methodically dismantled the prosecution's case piece by piece. The veterinary records showing Rex hospitalized during Marcus's arrest. The video analysis revealing behavioral differences between the courtroom dog and official Rex footage. Financial records showing Kowalski's mounting debts and the canine unit's budget crisis. Finally, Emma's identification of Cooper, corroborated by her grandmother's testimony. "Officer Kowalski," Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, "you are under oath. Is the dog in my courtroom the same animal that allegedly detected narcotics in Mr. Williams' toolbox?" The silence stretched like a taut wire. Kowalski's career, her freedom, and her entire future hung on her answer. She looked at Hayes, who stared back with a mixture of horror and betrayal, realizing that her perfect case was dissolving before her eyes. "Officer Kowalski," Judge Morrison repeated, "I will ask you once more. Are you Rex's handler, and is the dog in this courtroom the same animal that performed the drug detection that led to Mr. Williams' arrest?" Kowalski's composure finally shattered like glass under pressure. Tears streamed down her face as 20 years of law enforcement service crumbled beneath the weight of her desperation and deceit. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, Your Honor. The dog in the courtroom is Cooper, my personal pet. Rex was injured and hospitalized. I needed the arrest statistics to save my job. The K9 program was being eliminated. I couldn't let that happen." The courtroom erupted. When Judge Morrison reconvened the session and announced the emergency hearing's results, reporters scrambled for their phones, spectators gasped in disbelief, and Sarah Williams collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing with relief that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, her voice cutting through the chaos, "I am directing the bailiff to place Officer Kowalski under arrest for perjury, evidence tampering, and violation of civil rights under color of law. All charges against Marcus Williams are hereby dismissed with prejudice." Ada Hayes sat frozen at the prosecution table, watching her career implode in real time. The case she'd considered a guaranteed victory had become the scandal that would define her legacy. Across the aisle, Marcus Williams wept openly as David Chun embraced him, the weight of 6 weeks in county jail finally lifting from his shoulders. "How did you know?" Marcus asked Chun through his tears. Chun looked across the courtroom at 8-year-old Emma Williams, who was excitedly telling her grandmother about the nice doggy who'd remembered her. Sometimes the truth comes from the most unlikely sources, he replied. Your daughter just proved that children see things adults miss. They see with their hearts instead of their preconceptions. Officer Kowalski was led away in handcuffs. Her canine partner Cooper, watching confused as his handler disappeared through the same doors that had swallowed Marcus Williams 6 weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The dog who'd been used to destroy an innocent man's life had ultimately been the instrument of his salvation. Federal marshals were already coordinating with the FBI to investigate dozens of other cases involving Kowalski and Rex. The scandal would eventually reach the highest levels of Detroit's police department, triggering reforms that would prevent such deceptions from ever happening again. But in that moment, none of that mattered to the Williams family. Emma ran to her father as he was released from custody, throwing her small arms around his waist and declaring loudly enough for everyone to hear, I knew Cooper would help us. Daddy, he's a good dog, even when people make him do bad things. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came wrapped in pigtails and spoken with the clear voice of a child who simply told the truth about a dog she'd met at a barbecue. 6 months after Emma Williams' 2 words changed everything, Marcus stood in the doorway of his new auto repair shop, breathing in the familiar sense of motor oil and possibility. The sign above the bay doors read, Williams Family Auto Honest. Work, fair prices. And beneath it, in smaller letters, where truth matters. The irony wasn't lost on him that a man once branded as a drug dealer now built his business on the foundation of honesty. The settlement from the city of Detroit had been substantial $2.3 million for wrongful imprisonment, emotional distress, and violation of civil rights. More importantly, it had come with a formal apology from Mayor Davidson and a promise of sweeping police reforms. Marcus could have taken the money and moved far from Detroit, starting fresh where no one knew his story. Instead, he chose to stay and build something meaningful from the ashes of his nightmare. Daddy, can I help you fix Mrs. Rodriguez's car? Emma asked, skipping into the shop wearing child-sized coveralls that Sarah had special ordered. At 9 years old, she'd become something of a local celebrity, the little girl whose innocent words had exposed police corruption and saved her father. She handled the attention with typical childhood resilience, more interested in learning about carburetors than discussing her role in Detroit's biggest police scandal. Sure, Princess, Marcus replied, lifting her onto his shoulders so she could see the engine compartment. But remember the most important rule in this shop. Always tell the truth, Emma recited dutifully, even when it's scary. The motto had become the Williams family creed, born from their experience with lies that had nearly destroyed their lives. Marcus had testified before the city council about police accountability, spoken at law enforcement conferences about the dangers of performance pressure, and quietly mentored other families facing wrongful prosecution. He discovered that surviving injustice created an obligation to prevent others from experiencing the same trauma. Sarah emerged from the shop's small office where she managed the business side of their new venture. The nursing program at Wayne State University would have to wait another year, but she'd found purpose in running a business built on principles that mattered. The settlement money had eliminated their financial desperation, but more importantly, it had given them choices, the luxury of doing work they believed in, rather than simply surviving paycheck to paycheck. The reporter from Channel 7 is here, Sarah announced, straightening Marcus's work shirt. She wants to do a follow-up story on the police reforms. The reforms had been swift and comprehensive. Every K9 alert now required video documentation from multiple angles. Dogs underwent quarterly recertification by independent trainers. Officers faced mandatory psychological evaluations and financial audits to identify potential corruption risks. Most significantly, The Detroit Police Department had established a civilian review board with subpoena power to investigate misconduct allegations. Detective Ray Morrison, who'd unknowingly participated in Kowalski's deception, had become an unlikely ally in implementing the new protocols. His guilt over the wrongful prosecution had transformed him into a crusader for reform, earning him respect from both colleagues and civil rights advocates. Mr. Williams, the reporter, Jessica Chin, no relation to David, said as her cameraman, set up equipment. It's been 6 months since your exoneration. How has your family's life changed? Marcus considered the question while Emma played with a toy police car nearby, a gift from her therapist to help process her complicated feelings about law enforcement. The trauma of his imprisonment had affected the entire family in ways they were still discovering. Emma sometimes had nightmares about dogs, and Sarah struggled with anxiety whenever police cars appeared in their rearview mirror. But they'd also found strength they didn't know they possessed. We learned that the truth has power, Marcus said finally, but sometimes it needs help finding its voice. Emma's innocence cut through all the adult complications and lies. She saw Cooper as Cooper, not as Rex the superdog. Children don't have the prejudices that make adults accept impossible stories. The interview continued with updates on the criminal cases stemming from the scandal. Former officer Patricia Kowalski had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and perjury. 17 other cases involving her fabricated arrests had been overturned, with the city paying settlements totaling over $30 million. The real Rex had been retired to a rescue organization specializing in former police dogs, while Cooper had been adopted by the Johnson family, his original owners who'd let Kowalski borrow him for neighborhood barbecues. Ada Jennifer Hayes had resigned in disgrace, her political ambitions destroyed by her association with the scandal. She now worked for a small firm handling traffic violations and divorce cases, a dramatic fall from her aspirations for higher office. Her replacement, District Attorney Michael Torres, had implemented new protocols requiring prosecutors to independently verify all evidence before bringing cases to trial. David Chun had used the publicity from the Williams case to establish a nonprofit legal clinic focusing on wrongful convictions. The Williams family had donated $100,000 to the clinic, helping other families who lacked the resources to fight prosecutorial misconduct. Chun estimated that Emma's 2 words had eventually freed 43 wrongfully convicted individuals whose cases had been tainted by Kowalski's fraudulent arrests. As evening approached, the Williams family gathered for dinner at the small table in their new home, a 3-bedroom house with a yard where Emma could finally have the puppy she'd been promised. The dog they'd chosen was a gentle golden retriever, named Justice, a name suggested by Emma because he helps people feel better, just like we did. "Tell me the story again, Daddy," Emma asked as she helped clear the dishes. "About how I saved you with just 2 words. Marcus smiled, remembering how terrified he'd been that his daughter would grow up believing her father was a criminal. Instead, she'd grown up knowing she was a hero who'd helped restore faith in a justice system that had temporarily lost its way. "Once upon a time," Marcus began, settling into his favorite chair while Emma curled up beside him, "there was a brave little girl who believed that dogs should have their real names, and truth should be told, even in scary places with serious grown-ups." Sarah joined them, her head resting on Marcus's shoulder as he continued the story that had become family legend. Outside, Detroit continued its slow recovery from decades of economic decline. But inside the Williams home, justice lived in the Yaws. Simple truth that love, honesty, and the clear vision of children could overcome even the most powerful lies. Emma's 2 words, "Hi, Cooper," had become a symbol of hope for reform advocates nationwide. Law enforcement agencies across the country had implemented Cooper protocols requiring independent verification of canine evidence. The case had been studied in law schools as an example of how systemic pressures could corrupt individual officers, and how the most profound truths sometimes came from the most innocent sources. But for the Williams family, the real victory wasn't the money, the reforms, or the recognition. It was the simple fact that they'd survived intact, their love for each other strengthened by surviving injustice together. Emma would grow up knowing that speaking truth, even when it's frightening, even when adults might not believe you, was the most important thing a person could do. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, 2 words spoken with pure honesty can change the world.